it's now become a thing that when Alabama does it, when it started as Alabama does this, then Auburn did it to mock Alabama throughout that game, and then Alabama did it to mock them back afterwards, and now it's become so associated with Auburn that when an Alabama player does it in a basketball game against Auburn, Bruce Pearl tells the ref he's doing that to mock us because that's our thing.
Welcome to Beat Everyone. I am Ben Flanagan with AL.com. We're back. It's another edition of the series, the Alabama football's best 15 games of the 21st century. We're counting down from 15 to 1. As you know, more than halfway through this now. This really has been an awesome look back at some of the biggest moments of the last 25 years. They've made memories for us that we're going to carry on forever. Today is number 7. We're narrowing it down to the best of the absolute best. Our pick for the 7th best Alabama football game from the 21st century is Alabama versus Auburn, the Iron Bowl in 2021. Helping me to do this, as always, our good friend, Beat Everyone producer, Matt Scalici. Matt, this is it's a good game, technically.
In its totality, it's a good game.
The result was great, and it's something that Alabama fans obviously will cherish forever. But would you call this, like, fun?
I mean, I think that someone at all times in this game was having fun. It's just that it very rapidly shifted who was having fun at a very specific moment.
Yeah, masochists were having fun in this game.
Yeah.
So, look, I love blowouts, and I think blowouts belong on a list like this. A lot of people really enjoy great games because they're crazy. And for me, it's just like too stressful, especially with the Iron Bowl, especially when there's a lot on the line, especially when it's in Auburn. We're going to get into that. And in terms of like what it's like to experience a game inside Jordan-Hare Stadium, I think it's important to contextualize that. Matt, you've got a lot more experience than I do. I've been there one time, and I'll get into when that was in just a little while. But the rest I've watched from home. So this is November 27th, 2021. It's the Iron Bowl. It's Thanksgiving week, a 2:30 p.m. kick. CBS broadcast the game. Brad Nessler and Gary Danielson are on the call with Jamie Erdahl on the sideline. Matt, it was Nick Saban's 15th season as the Alabama head coach. They're coming off of the 2020 national championship year, arguably the most dominant season in college football history. It was the COVID year. So college stadiums are once again full capacity in 2021. So it's going to be difficult on the road in Auburn. But there are remnants of the pandemic sprinkled here and there. If you go back and watch the broadcast, like I mentioned, Jamie Erdahl is the sideline reporter. There's distance between her and whomever she's interviewing. There are little things like that. Some people may be masked still. But Bryce Young is the quarterback. And he has just had a spectacular season going into this game. He came into the game with 3,600 yards passing, 38 touchdowns, just 3 interceptions, a near 72 completion percentage. So we'll get into Bryce in just a little bit, Matt, but 3-year starter, Bo Nix for Auburn. He's out with a broken ankle, and he is interviewed before the game. TJ Finley starts at quarterback. I mentioned Jamie Erdahl. She interviewed Nix on the sideline before kickoff, and she actually asked him, do you have one more Iron Bowl in you next year? And he said, quote, we'll see. We've got to enjoy this one today and hopefully recover soon. And I'll make that decision later, end quote. But he drops a War Eagle. But, Matt, as we all know, he would leave Auburn to go play for Oregon for the next 2 seasons and have a lot of success there. Now he's in the NFL. Matt, Bo Nix played 2 Iron Bowls. He won in a shootout in 2019, and he lost in a blowout in 2020. Do you remember him as a thorn in the side of Alabama at all, or more of a footnote in Iron Bowl history?
I mean, I have probably a different view of Bo Nix because I knew him a little bit coming up as a recruit and had been following him. And there was a lot of hype around Bo Nix coming up. You know, we talked to Brody Croyle a few weeks ago, and people may recall he had kind of this like golden boy savior reputation coming into Alabama, in large part because he was a very highly regarded in-state recruit, but also he had grown up an Alabama fan and he always wanted to play at Alabama. And I think that sort of adds some mystique to a player like that. Bo Nix was that for Auburn. He was a heralded recruit. I believe he may have won the Elite 11, which is an off-season recruit competition for quarterbacks out at the Nike headquarters. Um, but a very, very highly regarded quarterback, and his dad played at Auburn and was a bit of an Auburn legend himself at quarterback. So there was a lot of expectation and hype, not just because he was good, but because perhaps even more so than at other places, for you to be a sort of born and bred Auburn fan and then to come to Auburn and be a great player there, it's just absolutely the dream scenario for Auburn fans. And I know I say that like it wouldn't mean as I think that would be a scenario any fan base would care about. It's extremely important to Auburn fans. The idea of being sort of part of that circle, that family that they talk about, it is very meaningful to them. So there were so many expectations placed on Bo Nix, and he really, for the most part, I think lived up to or exceeded them. It's just that he didn't really have great teams around him for the most part during his career. And his best shot, as we talked about, you mentioned that 2019 Iron Bowl. Even then, he kind of needed some things to go his way. Tua Tagovailoa was out for Alabama in that game. You know, he was both lucky and good, I think, in some ways, but unlucky in terms of he happened to be at Auburn at a time of tremendous coaching turnover.
Yeah, upheaval, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
I don't think he had broken his ankle. I think he was scared to play in this game personally,
He
and he
was a
just
huge
he
presence at this game, by the way. Like you mentioned, they interviewed him before the game. I bet they cut to him a dozen times during this game. Anytime something significant happens, they cut to Bo Nix on the sideline.
he was the only pregame interview too. They tossed down, and then neither of the coaches, I don't believe, talked before kickoff. This was the 86th Iron Bowl. Alabama had they had a 47-37 edge with one draw in the rivalry. The home team had won the last 5 games. Alabama had lost their last 2 in Jordan-Hare, 3 of their last 4. And Matt, you wouldn't believe this, but 7 years later, the CBS team was still showing the kick six highlights in the lead up here. Something that Alabama fans obviously expect anytime they turn on the channel. But look, I mean, we know weird things happen in Jordan-Hare Stadium. We talked about it a little bit on previous episodes. I think that you even called it a quote portal to hell at one point. But let's spend another minute on it here, Matt. Why is Jordan-Hare Stadium hell on earth, especially on Iron Bowl Saturdays?
This has been a topic of discussion this week, Ben, because, and I think what prompted this was the EA Sports video game releasing their sort of ranking of the toughest places to play in college football. And of course, Auburn is on the list, and Auburn fans thought that Jordan-Hare should have been much higher on the list. And really, the reason that is cited for why they aren't higher is because their record isn't very good against ranked opponents at home over the past 5 years or more. I think it's extremely situational. It is not like, let's say, Tiger Stadium at LSU, where they're always that way, especially for night games. Auburn fans are situationally uh, extremely intimidating, and the situations are not what you'd think they'd be. That's what it really is. That it's not necessarily when it's a championship on the line. It's not necessarily when it's a highly ranked opponent. It's There are emotional arcs to an Auburn football season, and when that team needs its fan base the most, they seem to show up and come alive. And home Iron Bowls in a disappointing season, those always seem to be a moment when that fan base shows up big. And what's crazy is it didn't come out of nowhere in 2021. I remember talking to Auburn fans who were really disappointed with the way the season was going. They weren't really sold on Brian Harsin at all, and yet they thought they had a shot in the Iron Bowl. And it made no sense on paper. There is no way a reasonable person would have looked at those two teams at that point in their seasons and said, I don't know, I think Auburn could do it. But Auburn fans seemed to know and seemed to believe they would have this kind of competitive edge in this game. I don't know what kind of black magic they're all tapped into, but they knew and they were right. But I think it's a combination of a true rivalry type hatred that they have for Alabama. And also, I think the players understand that and sense that and feed off of that from the fan base, and they prepare differently for Alabama. And I think as we watch this game, Ben, what really stands out to me is that Auburn defense looks incredibly well prepared. It's not a fluke how the defense plays in this game for Auburn. I mean, it's like they know what's coming. They're always in the right place. Their coverage of these incredible Alabama receivers is just phenomenal. And they played above their normal playing level in this game.
Yeah, I think Alabama were 20+ point favorites, even on the road against Auburn. Auburn was 6-5. Alabama had the playoff in front of them, so it makes sense that Alabama would be heavy favorites. But we talk about weird things happening in this place, and the only experience that I have, I was actually at the Kick Six game, my first and
Mm-hmm.
only Auburn game at Auburn. I sat in the stands. I was way up high. I had a clear view of everything. Most of the stadium emptied in a matter of seconds when the kick six happened, because they rush the field every other game. So they know how to scatter down to that level super efficiently. But it honestly made our exit that much easier, though, because, I mean, the place was empty, so Alabama fans could just walk out leisurely. But we just glided out of the stadium in record time. But it was like walking into like another dimension of like this post-apocalyptic nightmare, because it was pitch black, because it's poorly lit with these awful orange buzzing streetlights. And it was like 28 days later, Matt, like there would be like one Auburn fan after another sort of like sprinting out of the dark, because they're going crazy. And why shouldn't they? But they're sprinting out of the dark like one of those like rage virus zombies, like either to the stadium or up to the toilet paper corner. And Alabama fans are screaming at them, and they're screaming. I felt like Emilio Estevez in Judgment Night. You take one wrong turn and Dennis Leary and his goons are chasing me. So that was one of my only trips.
What a pull right there, Ben.
Yeah.
That you're above my head there on that reference.
Well, go Google it. It may be streaming. Check out the soundtrack. A lot of Cypress Hill on it. But that was my first and last trip to Jordan-Hare Stadium. So yeah, special place.
Yeah, I mean, I've obviously over the course of covering them, I've been there many times for Iron Bowls and otherwise. And I've been there when the atmosphere was very intense for games that were not Alabama, but it is a different level. And the times that I have been in that building and looked around and said, holy crap, this place is terrifying. It was almost always Alabama that was on the other sideline. And I think for that particular game, I my recollection of 2013 was I think it was pretty intense, but I guess maybe it didn't feel as strange to me because Auburn was a pretty good team that year, and they had just come off of beating Georgia, and it was a highly anticipated game. 2021 was not, as you said. Everybody outside of that building expected Alabama to go in there and easily handle business, and essentially once you get a few minutes into the first quarter and it's not looking like it's going to be an easy win for Alabama, they smell blood in there and the intensity ratchets up more and more. And you get to halftime and they're all coming out of halftime believing they're going to win that game. And it is on fire in there.
That's the one thing I'll say about Auburn when it comes to the Iron Bowl is one thing as Alabama fans might envy in some ways, even if they've never admit it, is that Auburn fans and the team for that matter, they know they're going to win. Like no
Yes.
matter how good or bad they are, no matter if they do or don't win the game, they're programmed to not just believe but know that they're going to beat Alabama. And
Yes.
that type of confidence is something you need when you're a heavy underdog like that. And it
They
works
are,
out
yeah,
sometimes.
they're a uniquely hopeful fan base. And you're right. You can't look. Square one is you can't win if you don't think you can. You have to believe that it's at least possible, and I think it helps even more if you believe it's likely that you're going to win. Um, I mean, it's the biggest, most reasonable explanation I can give you for why they play legitimately statistically better against Alabama than they do against other opponents when they're in that building.
I mentioned that it was Saban's 15th season. It was Brian Harson's first at Auburn. He had coached at Boise State for 7 years before becoming the Auburn coach. Matt, look, I would say that Harson has since become a polarizing figure, but he kind of was at the time of the hire and certainly during his tenure there. How would you describe Brian Harson, the coach and the person for the uninitiated?
For the record, let me just say I thought it was a bad hire from the beginning, and I expressed that I didn't that I expressed skepticism from the beginning, which of course meant that a certain percentage of the Auburn fan base believed that I was a hater, and that no matter what he did, I was always going to feel that way. And whatever, my record for all that stuff speaks for itself. I think I was pretty heavily praising of Gus Malzahn when he did things well, which he did a lot of things well, especially in this rivalry. I think the biggest thing with Harson was I did not sense that he understood the sort of gravity of his position. I don't think he got what Auburn is about, but I also think, I also just think, recruiting issues aside, which I think is was a pretty obvious deficiency for him. I don't think he was a great leadership figure for the most part. I didn't ever find him to be very inspiring, and despite all of that, he had this team. Like, I have to give him credit for this game. He had this team ready to pull off a huge upset. Um, and they were that was despite the fact that they were 6-5 coming into this game. They had not had a tremendously strong season. They lost some pretty embarrassing, kind of inexplicable games, and this I think most other teams in this position are feeling pretty pessimistic heading into this game, and this team was obviously raring to go.
Okay, so Alabama's 10-1 going into the game. Their only loss came on the road against Texas A&M. They win with a last-second field goal. One of Alabama's former assistants, Jimbo Fisher, finally beats him, but Alabama has played their way back into playoff contention at this point. They survive a really tough game against Arkansas the week before, when Bryce Young had to throw for 559 passing yards to win by 1 touchdown. It's Bill O'Brien's first season as the offensive coordinator. Alabama obviously has a Heisman-worthy quarterback who has waited his turn in Bryce Young, and they have a talented running back, Tuscaloosa's own Brian Robinson, 2 outstanding receivers, and John Mechie, along with Ohio State transfer Jamison Williams, a tight end with a ton of upside, Jaleel Billingsley. We can get into the weeds with it in a little bit, but let's go ahead and talk about Bryce Young, Matt. He ends up being the big story of this game for obvious reasons. They've got some firepower on offense, but it really all hinges on Young, who is one of the biggest recruits in Alabama's history at the time. He plays backup to Mac Jones in 2020. he's clearly the guy for at least the next 2 seasons once Mac Jones is gone. There is no quarterback competition, which is unusual for the Saban era. What made Bryce Young this guy who a lot of people consider the best quarterback in Alabama history, Matt? Like, why do you think that he was so special?
Well, I think the quality that always will jump out to me about Bryce Young is his poise. He was so cool and calm even under tremendous pressure, and I think he did face a lot of pressure that his predecessor quarterbacks didn't, because he was there in a sort of strange gap of time for Alabama's offensive line. It wasn't as strong as other units had been in other years, at least not in terms of pass protection. And Bryce ended up being a great fit for that moment in Alabama football because he's such a good improviser. He was so good at essentially playing his receivers open. He could buy time. He was very sneakily evasive in the backfield, and knew how to place the ball at a spot that didn't look like his receiver was open at the moment, but by throwing it where he threw it, it created space, and he got his receivers open, and he came through in in crunch times for Alabama. He did it multiple times that season. But what was interesting about this, Ben, and I think we would see this later for Bryce in his career, there were very rare moments where I think you would be reminded of how young he was and see him get a little bit rattled by the situation. And I think that's a little bit what happens. I wouldn't put it all on him. Certainly, there was a lot of things that didn't go right for Alabama in this game, but he gets a little bit rattled in this game early on. I think you could see a little bit of shades of that, in his sort of early time in Carolina, where suddenly, he's on the worst team in the NFL, which is something he's not been used to in his career up to that point. And you see that tiny bit of I wouldn't call it panic, but he's shaken. He's a little bit uncertain, and he needs time to find his feet. And I think it's so interesting to see. I think most guys, when they do get into that state of mind, they don't come back out of it. Certainly not that day. And it's interesting to see someone play like that early in a game and come out of it and look unbelievably poised later in that same game.
Yeah, a lot of emotional maturity from Bryce Young, and you compound that with his talent. I mean, the guy was extremely talented. You mentioned some of the ability that he had just in terms of like being a playmaker, extending plays with his feet, but he had a great arm. He had pinpoint accuracy, and he knew the offense up and down. He knew where everybody was. He could see the entire field, and he had weapons to start this game. Anyway, so Alabama kicks off to start this game in the first half absolutely sucks. There are 12 punts between the two teams, 12 punts between them both. Nobody can get anything going until Auburn has great field position. They put together an ugly but effective 4-down drive. They score a lone touchdown in the half. It's 7-0 at the break. And even worse, with 9 minutes left in the second quarter, during the 10th punt of the game, Jamison Williams makes a tackle on punt coverage, and he is ejected for targeting. So they lose their most explosive offensive weapon. Big loss for Alabama. And Matt, it doesn't get any better in the second half. Alabama goes 3 and out for negative 10 yards. Auburn gets a field goal. They go up 2 possessions, which feels like 100-0 at that point. And then Bryce Young throws an interception, just his 4th of the season, but Alabama forces another Auburn punt. Alabama turns it over on downs. Auburn punts again. Alabama turns it over on downs. Josh Jobe intercepts TJ Finley on the first play of their next drive, and Alabama finally puts points on the board with a field goal. Alabama punts again, and then Alabama turns it over on, or Auburn punts again, Alabama turns it over on downs, and we get yet another Auburn punt to set up Alabama's final offensive possession of regulation. So Alabama does nothing on offense, nothing. Credit to the Auburn defense, but also credit to Alabama's. I mean, they did their job. They held Auburn to 159 total yards. They forced a turnover. Auburn only had 12 first downs to Alabama's 19, just 22 yards rushing. I mean, this is guys like Will Anderson, Henry To'oTo'o, Jordan Battle, Christian Harris, Brian Branch, Dallas Turner. So they're pretty loaded on defense with talent. But credit where it's due. The name of the Auburn punter, Matt, is Oscar Chapman. He punts the ball 10 times in this game for a total of 427 total yards. His longest was for 57 yards, and he put 5 of them inside the 20-yard line. He also had a couple where he pinned Alabama inside their own 5, including this last possession.
It was an Australian punter battle, Ben.
James Burnip.
James Burnip, a big day for him. I believe he was a freshman in this game, but a mostly good game for him. But as you mentioned, kind of a key mistake in the first half for Burnip, a bit of a shank punt, and it gives Auburn the ball on Alabama's 39. And that's really their only points in the game for the vast majority of this game. I mean, they end up getting a field goal later off of another short field. And what's crazy, Ben, is Alabama's defense, I think that's where, when we talk about this being a great game or not, this is a spectacular game for Alabama's defense. They give up only 159 yards total for the entire game. Alabama outgains Auburn 388 to 159 total yards in this game. It is a truly spectacular defensive performance for this Alabama group. It's just that Alabama's offense, with very few terrible mistakes, like you said, only really the one turnover, but Auburn makes those possessions count defensively, and they give their offense a short field on 2 occasions, and that's all it takes for them to turn those into points. So it's such a strange game to look up and see that mismatch of offensive production, but yet it came down to the wire.
Yeah, and let's just set up quickly how this 97-yard drive was set up. So Alabama's down 10-3. They give the ball, of all people, to Trey Sanders, and he gets stuffed on a 4th and 1, and Auburn takes over at the Alabama 45. So looks bleak.
Well, and let's say, I'm just a quick bit of setup for that. Trey Sanders is in because on the previous drive where Alabama ends up with a field goal, Brian Robinson has a huge explosive run, probably the biggest offensive play of the game up to that point for Alabama, but he ends up getting hurt on that play. And so Brian Robinson, who's really been the only productive part of the offense all day, Alabama has to go down the stretch without him. And Trey Sanders, who does a very admirable job here, he was a sort of a little bit of a worn for wear old timer on this team.
Yeah, and Alabama had to burn the rest of their timeouts so that they could force a 3 and out from Auburn and to get one last shot at this. And they have to do it with no timeouts, with just 1 minute and 35 seconds on the clock on their own 3-yard line. So, Matt, I mean, this is when the legend of Bryce Young is truly born. He goes 97 yards to tie the game. But let's help people remember just exactly how he did it. Matt, there are 3 throws on this drive that are unbelievable, that like only 1 or 2 guys could probably even make in college football at this point. One is on 3rd and 10, where Bryce Young is in the middle of the end zone, and his own end zone, and he moves up in a collapsing pocket. He finds Mechie on the run for a 1st down completion. It's a big chunk play, so the drive is alive. They're going. The next one, and I think it might be the most clutch pass of the Saban era, other than maybe like the Tua throw against Georgia, a couple of A.J. McCarron throws. With 43 seconds left, again, no timeouts. It's 4th and 7. This is the game. Like, this is also the famous shot of Bryce Young smiling before the snap that people remember.
Yes.
Like this, where people are like, this dude's a psychopath, right? Alabama is 0 for 3 on 4th down conversions in this game, and he steps back. He hits Jaleel Billingsley with a dart on an out route to get the 1st down, keep the drive and the season alive, and that sets up what will be the game-tying touchdown throw. What are you remembering about Bryce Young on this drive?
I mean, the Jaleel Billingsley throw on 4th down, it's kind of an underrated play, I think, because the place kind of goes silent after it happens. It's there's more to be done after it, but the pressure of that moment. I mean, Ben, I can remember. It feels like you're holding your breath even when you watch it now. 4th down, I mean, it's over. It's all over if you do anything wrong on this play. And it's not like Billingsley is wide open streaking down the field. I mean, it's a pretty tight window he has to get the ball through, and he hits him just before he gets to the sidelines. I mean, it is to even let that ball go out of your hand. I don't think most people, whether you have the physical ability to throw that ball or not, most people mentally, I think, given the situation, I just don't think you could let yourself let the ball go, because you're going to be thinking, well, if I don't do this perfectly, I've blown it. It's all over. Um, but as you said, I think Bryce was feeling it. I think he was enjoying, and I mean, I've talked to his dad about it. Um, he 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 likes that situation. That's fun to him, to know that it's all on his shoulders, and that if you do succeed here, it's going to be so fun. It's going to be so great to have been losing this whole game and come back and win. I just don't think most people are thinking that way about a situation like that. They're thinking about how much you can lose and what's at stake. And Bryce is thinking, how fun will it be if I go out here and win this right now?
Yeah, and so 29 seconds left in the game. It's 3rd and 10, and Bryce Young hits Ja'Cory Brooks for the touchdown down the sideline, makes this sort of like semi-diving catch in the end zone, stretches his arms out anyway before they tie it up, and they send it to overtime with a Will Reichard extra point because, even though there were 23 seconds left in the game after they tie it up, and Auburn has a timeout, they just kneel it out. They're like, let's play for overtime. And so
Mm-hmm.
Matt, what is your level of confidence that Alabama is winning an overtime game inside Jordan-Hare Stadium?
I think at that point, I felt pretty good that Alabama had the momentum. It's such a, I mean, because again, you can feel that energy in the stadium, and in as much as it felt like Alabama's losing this game around halftime or so, after that play, you feel it all suck out of the building. I mean, they are so deflated, they're so disappointed. I think it's very hard to come back from an emotional letdown like that. And I will say this, Ben, not exactly at that moment, but after the first overtime, uh, where and this ends up going to 4 overtimes. But after the first overtime, I was standing next. We're all on the field. Every media member is on the field. I'm standing next to an Auburn beat writer named Jason Caldwell, great guy, and when Brian Harsin, they score the touchdown, but Brian Harsin chooses to go for the extra point and keep it going, go to a second overtime rather than go for the win. Uh, Jason turns to me and says, "That's the game right there. Auburn, they're not going to win. You got to go for the kill right then. You don't want to keep playing Alabama." And I think he's so right, Ben. I think Brian Kelly was kind of great evidence of that a year later when he had the same opportunity, right? You could either just keep playing against Alabama and hope they make a mistake, or you go for the kill when you have the chance. I think that's the move. I think that's what you want to do. And Harsin, for whatever reason, did not make that choice.
How many times during this game, Matt, had you already declared victory for Auburn? How many times had you counted Alabama out of the game?
It didn't look, it absolutely did not feel like Alabama had a scoring drive like that in them,
No,
given the rest of the day.
it was rough. Yeah, it was rough, but
But once you get it to overtime, it's different because you're in scoring position already.
yeah,
And
it
so it
became
essentially comes down to, can you execute like 2 plays?
it
And
became
yeah.
different during the Saban era because Alabama had really negative experience with overtime games prior to successes that they would see with him. And I remember in the game of the century in 2011, once they had sent that to overtime, most Alabama fans in the building thought it's over. LSU's going to win this game, and they did. Obviously, not because Alabama fans thought that it would happen; they just dreaded overtime. And certainly against a team like Auburn, but Young is pretty surgical in the 4 overtimes that they play. He finds our guy, Slade Bolden, for a touchdown in the first overtime, but TJ Finley responds to tie it. They both get field goals in the second overtime. And then Young finds Mechie for a 2-point conversion in the third, while Finley hits John Samuel Schenker to tie it. And then in the last overtime, TJ Finley's pass is broken up by Kool-Aid McKinstry. He makes an awesome play on the ball, nearly intercepts it. And then Alabama just needs a conversion to win the game. And Matt, this brings us to our next category, the kill shot, right? When it's a walk-off play, that has to be the kill shot, don't you think?
Yeah, for sure. It happened right in front of me. I was a few feet from it, and the I'll just say there was a big emotional release from the Alabama players after that play. Their first instinct wasn't to dogpile and lift each other up in the air and be jubilant. Their first instinct was to all at the same time face the Auburn student section, which they were right in front of, and crane kick. And
Right.
essentially, it was it was a release of uh yeah, I mean, it's a unique joy to hear someone's voice trash talking you all day for hours and hours, and then you come out on top and you can see their faces right in front of you.
Yeah, John Mechie, he runs this really clever sort of like stutter step out route. He's open, not wide open, but he's open, and Young hits him on the money. He takes 2 steps. He's right next to the sideline too. I mean, but he
Yep.
takes 2 steps into the end zone. The game is over, and then like you said, he hits the quote unquote Crimson Crane. Matt, I'm just curious. You mentioned this. What did you think of the whole Crimson Crane celebration? Like, I think it started that year. I want to say Mechie maybe even was the guy who started it, maybe not, but it spread like wildfire, and it kind of carried over for the next couple of years. And then when Alabama would lose, other teams would use it against them and vice versa. But what did you think of that celebration?
Well, it's so funny that it's become what it is now, because it's now become a thing that when Alabama does it, when it started as Alabama does this, then Auburn did it to mock Alabama throughout that game, and then Alabama did it to mock them back afterwards, and now it's become so associated with Auburn that when an Alabama player does it in a basketball game against Auburn, Bruce Pearl tells the ref he's doing that to mock us because that's our thing. So it's so backwards. It's so weird. And that's great. That's one of the great things about rivalries is they develop kind of their own lore to them. But I mean, I think it became kind of a safe way for these teams to trash talk each other, which I personally think is fun. And I think we need more of it in sports. But, I used to say for years and years, the Iron Bowl, like, it's not what the fans think it is. Like, the fans really hate each other, but the players, a lot of these guys, like, grew up playing with each other, against each other. They know each other, they're friends. I think that's changed, and this might have been the first year that it started to feel different, because I think there's more heat on the field the last several years of this rivalry. And I mean, we saw it in Tuscaloosa this year, Ben. Like, there were some brawls breaking out on the sidelines of this game. I mean, I think we're to a place right now where these teams do not like each other. Um, and I think it's okay for there to be periods of that in a rivalry. I don't know that you want it to continue escalating forever.
No, no, certainly not escalating. But you love the competitive sort of sort of like the fiery competition between the players. Like, that's what you want
Yeah.
in games like this when it's high stakes. It is arguably, if I would say the best rivalry in college football, maybe even sports in a lot of ways. So I want to see that. That's good for the game. It's good for the fans too, and it just makes everything that much more important. So Matt, let's name the MVP. Who won the game. I mean, this is pretty clear who the Iron Bowl MVP is in 2021.
Got to be Bryce. I mean, it's a spectacular moment. He won the Heisman Trophy in that moment. We could argue whether he needed to beat Georgia the following week in the SEC championship game, which was an upset really for Alabama. I don't think a lot of people expected them to win, but I think I think once this drive happened, I think most Heisman voters had probably made up their mind that they were going to vote for Bryce.
I had just again forgotten his numbers. Like I was watching the game again, and they just put him up on screen: 38 touchdowns, 3 interceptions, and then
It's nuts.
he puts this drive together. It's just unbelievable. So it's Bryce. He's the MVP. He won the game, and deservedly so. So Matt, we get to takeaways. Alabama wins the game. Obviously, at the 22-20 is the final score after 4 overtimes. So they, as you mentioned, they're going to beat Georgia in the SEC championship game. Bryce seals the Heisman further in that game because he has an amazing game against Georgia. But they have their first quarterback to win a Heisman Trophy. They lose John Mechie to a torn ACL, and then they beat Cincinnati in the playoff semifinal. They set up a rematch against Georgia in Indianapolis. They lose Jamison Williams to a torn ACL early in that game, so they're down their two best wide receivers. They have the lead in the fourth quarter, but they just can't make enough stops. Georgia wins the title, unfortunately. Matt, is this one that you sort of see as one that got away? Like, should Alabama have won this game, or did what happened was what happened the thing that was supposed to happen? How do you remember that one?
This one and 23, I think will forever be kind of linked together in a way. And look, this one's on our list and 23 isn't, because as much as you joked about this being a miserable game until that last drive, 23 is even worse, Ben. A truly hideous game that has one good play in it for Alabama, essentially. But this I think this one stands out more because, for one, it becomes this moment where an individual player becomes really legendary for Alabama, where Bryce won the Heisman. I think that it also broke a trend of Auburn winning these home Iron Bowls. And in a way, I think it's really had a big impact on the rivalry. I mean, this was such a back and forth rivalry. 17 and 19, Alabama was arguably the better team in both of those games and still lost because it was in Jordan-Hare Stadium. And I think it gave them a big edge. And this looked like it was going to continue the trend, and it didn't. Alabama interrupted it. And, as a result of this one and 2023, Alabama is now finding themselves with a 5-year winning streak in this rivalry, which is kind of remarkable. I mean, it hasn't happened in the lifetime of any millennial fan, certainly. So, I mean, I think it is significant and important in this moment of this sort of larger moment of Alabama football, where Alabama has gotten a hand up in this rivalry in a way that they really haven't. Regardless of how great they were during the Saban era, they never had an era of dominance in the Iron Bowl like they're having right now.
Yeah, it was Alabama's second win in this 5-game winning streak against Auburn. Bryce went undefeated in his 2 games against Auburn. So did Mac Jones. So did Jalen Milroe. Their last 3 quarterbacks undefeated against Auburn. So the ball is in Ty Simpson's court, and they've also won their
Well, Mac,
last.
I have to correct. Mac
Oh, excuse
unfortunately
me,
did lose 2019. Yeah.
Pardon me. Yeah, sorry, Auburn fans. Matt, thanks for correcting me on their behalf. I had forgotten about that. Tua had been hurt, so apologies there. But Jalen Milroe and Bryce Young both undefeated against Auburn. But Alabama's also won their last 2 games in Jordan-Hare, and neither of them were easy. Bryce is back for his junior season. Alabama loses twice during that regular season. They nearly have a case to make the playoff, but they're left out. Just not enough on the resume. Bryce has an awesome Sugar Bowl. They dominate Kansas State. He's the first overall pick in the NFL draft. So storybook year in career for Bryce, even if he fell short as the starting quarterback trying to win a national championship. Alabama's first Heisman. He's the first overall pick. That was sort of like the notch and certainly Saban's belt in his era at Alabama that he hadn't quite reached, that the area of the mountaintop that he hadn't quite reached. Never had a first overall pick until Bryce Young. And so really, really awesome career and fun guy to watch. And we're enjoying watching him at the next level now. But Matt, last thing, I mean, how do you remember the 2021 season and that team?
Well, it was a weird season to cover for sure, because we were still, I don't think anybody thinks of it this way, because 2020 was the year where everything was really weird. But 2021 still had a lot of COVID effects left over from it, whether it was players getting extra years of eligibility, and that really changed a lot of things. But also just sort of the way that we covered games as media members, and the way that a lot of fans attended games was still being impacted by that a little bit. And certainly in the playoffs, it felt kind of strange. It felt a little bubbled in the playoffs at times. But I think it was more that the sort of after effects. It was like things felt a little different after 2020. And look, it was a great team, and I think if they're going up against anybody other than this new superpower machine that a Saban disciple had built at Georgia, I think Alabama wins the national championship that year. If they don't lose their top two receivers, I think Alabama wins a national championship that year. It's just one of those things, being part of a dynasty. You always are going to look back and say, you know, we could have had even more, which is, I think, lots of other fan bases would be envious of being in that position.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, they almost won that championship game. Again, they had a fourth quarter lead, and all they really had to do at one point was just get a defensive stop, and they probably are able to finish it off. Didn't happen. Georgia made the plays they needed to make. Bryce obviously threw that pick six that kind of sealed it for Georgia in the end, but they got him in the SEC championship game. That was really satisfying to watch. It clinched his Heisman campaign. Will Anderson had a dominant season. It was fun to watch one of Alabama's all-time best defensive players just come through game after game.
Yeah, had a Heisman case to make himself.
Yeah, absolutely. That would have been so cool had he been a finalist. He was clearly the best defensive player in the country. So it was a fun team to watch. It's crazy to look back and think that, Alabama under Saban would not win another national championship, right? Like 2020 was it. And they had all of these amazing players like Bryce Young and Will Anderson and the other guys that I mentioned. But that would be that. But that's okay. Those last three seasons were still really fun to watch for many reasons. And one of them was this game. So that's number 7 on our list of Alabama football's 15 best games of the 21st century. We're moving through it. You can join us next week for 2 more episodes of this show, including Wednesday when we hit number 6 on the list. You won't want to miss that. You can find Beat Everyone on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, wherever you get your podcasts. And Matt Scalici, Beat Everyone producer, thanks as always for doing this.
Thanks, Ben.
All right, I am Ben Flanagan with AL.com. Thank you. We will see you next time.